as we get set up with the access and the interpreting and the captioning, and we're so thankful that you're here with us late on a Tuesday, on a busy time of year with your kids, and we just want to welcome you to this webinar. And I see now that our illustrious and wonderful speakers have all arrived, which makes my blood pressure go down, makes me very happy. And how we're going to do this tonight is we have several wonderful speakers that will be sharing some slides with you. Diane Pevsner is the president of our division. And when I say our division, that's the Council for Exceptional Children. And so I'm going to ask Diane if we can go ahead and record this meeting so that we can get started, and that the parents and family members that can't be here right now, they can have access to a link later that they can watch.
Okay, we're being recorded.
Thanks, Diane. So this is Amy again. I want to welcome everybody. We're going to formally start the meeting. You hopefully have had an option to check out the chat pod and to know that you can send messages to each other there and interact there as we go through our very special presentation and the slides. You also should have access to a link for the captioning pod that you can open up if you would like the captioning pod to be larger. So if you need access to that, scroll up in the chat pod and there is a separate link that you can click on. But Diane Pevsner has shared her screen so that you can see the captioning, the interpretation by Josh, and the slides at the same time. And then our presenters will each one go on camera if they have access to them that's working, or they will use audio and speak when the time comes. So the Council for Exceptional Children, what is that? This organization that I'm affiliated with and very proud to be affiliated with is the largest international special education organization in the world. And it has different divisions in it. And this funny symbol that you see up here on the slides, DVIDB, what does that stand for? It's the Division on Visual Impairments and Deafblindness. And this division is a part of the CEC. So the CEC has special focus groups, or groups of people, professionals, and they partner with family organizations as well that focus on specific issues. And this division, the Division on Visual Impairments and Deafblindness, is very passionate about services for children with visual impairments and deafblindness, as you might imagine. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, Diane. I really want to thank our sponsors here for this webinar, and those sponsors include the National Family Association for the Deafblind. In a few minutes you'll hear from Clara Berg, their president. We also have a special sponsor, the Charge Syndrome Foundation. Sherry Stanger, who is the Director of Outreach, is going to be speaking with us. And we also have the National Coalition on Deafblindness. And Linda Alsop and Tracy Luiselli will be speaking with us later in this presentation. Each one of those organizations donated money to the CEC because this isn't sponsored by grant dollars or an agency. Many federally funded agencies aren't allowed to do formal advocacy, and there is an advocacy component to the CEC. So because of these gracious organizations, we are able to provide the captioning and the interpretation that you see, and we'll be able to provide a link to families who weren't able to attend tonight. So thanks very much to our sponsors. And the next slide, please, Diane. So I mentioned a little bit the role of the division. I've already covered a little bit of what's on this slide. But the Council for Exceptional Children does engage in advocacy at the national level. And within our division, we are responsible for creating and maintaining standards, specific standards for teachers of the deafblind and interveners. That's why we're very proud to host this webinar tonight and to have different speakers represented from different states to share information with you. Also, the Office of Special Education Programs often looks to the Council for Exceptional Children to help with recognizing standards and recognizing roles. So whenever we have a national convention, Office of Special Education project officers and staff attend those meetings. And so that's why we're very glad to be able to partner with our sponsors tonight and our special speakers to offer some information to you about interveners, teachers of the deafblind, and special partnerships that we have. So I'm going to turn it over now, and I'm very happy to stop talking. And if Clara Berg and Sherry Stanger could activate their video cameras, I want to welcome two brilliant family leaders who are going to be talking with you about why they sponsored this webinar and why they want you to be able to work collaboratively around some opportunities. So I'm going off camera, and welcome Clara and Sherry. And next slide, please.
Well, go ahead, Sherry.
I think that Sherry is muted. Clara, you can go ahead and...
I just want to make sure that you can hear me. Can you hear me well?
Yes, this is Amy. I can hear you.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
this is Diane.
So
Sherry,
I
Sherry
just want to say that NFADB is very honored to be part of this initiative and very happy we can work in partnership with the DVIDB as a subcommittee of the CEC and with CHARGE and with the National Coalition on Deafblindness. As parents of children who are deafblind, being a parent myself of an adult with deafblindness, it is our obligation to continue advocating for better services, not only for them, for all the children, and keeping up to date with all the information available that might improve and enhance their well-being. We are the leaders in our children's lives, and working together, we can succeed in obtaining what they need. NFADB is supporting the new bill, HR 3535, with Mr. March Richard will describe in a few minutes. NFADB is a strong believer that individuals with deafblindness are valued members of their communities. And in order to be considered as such and be accepted with their gifts, they need to have qualified educators working with them. This process might take some time, but we should never underestimate the power of our community because together we have a very strong voice. This webinar is a gigantic enterprise. It's reuniting the deaf community, the blind community, the deafblind community, and also NCDB and state projects who are also working with the AHOA modules to train interpreters, interveners, and specialists in different areas of deafblindness. We are all working together to make this happen. Diana, please.
Hi, this is Amy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Sherry, I can hear you. Clara? Clara, can you hear me?
No, I cannot hear you.
I can hear you. Clara, can you hear me now?
I can speak, but I cannot hear what you're saying.
Okay. We can hear you, Clara. I don't know if you captioning. Clara,
I
you've
don't know what's happening.
This is Diane. Everyone is unmuted right now. So you have to mute and unmute your own microphone.
I don't have the problem anymore.
okay. This is Amy. If you could please mute your microphone. Clara, can you hear me? Sherry, we
I cannot hear you.
Okay.
So, first microphone.
This is Diane. Clara, I'm showing you as being unmuted. Can you hear me?
This is Amy. I'm going to ask that while Sherry is unmuted, if we could go ahead with Sherry's portion of the presentation at this time. And Clara, we can actually hear you if you're reading the captioning.
Sorry, Clara.
Hi.
Actually, while I was muted, I was going to describe the current slide that is up. It's a nice visual showing our organizations working collaboratively, the Council for Exceptional Children, Division on Visual Impairments and Deafblindness, the Charges Institution, National Coalition on Deafblindness, and the National Family Association for Deafblind, surrounding Bill 3535. We are working together with family and professional partners, and we're supporting the specific needs of students with sensory disabilities. And in particular, today, we will be talking about the needs of students who are deafblind. Next slide, please, Diane. Okay, we had 5 points that Clara and I were going to be speaking to, which is family leadership, qualified educators, and partnership, the power of connections, and the journey. And Clara already spoke to those points. And next slide, please. We have, since Clara can't speak right now, we had the NFADB slide with the mission and their value statement. And next slide, please. Okay, so welcome to this wonderful webinar that's a product of the collaboration of multiple organizations. A unique opportunity for our groups to come together to benefit the deafblind community, families, consumers, and professionals. As the Director of Outreach for the CHARGE Syndrome Foundation and the parent of a young woman with CHARGE syndrome, I'm excited for this opportunity to share information with our community and to know that we are committed to working together to foster change for our children and those to come. It is crucial that families stay well educated, informed, and partake in the discussion and advocacy efforts. Without the family voice, we do not move forward in our efforts to ensure that our children learn from qualified educators. This journey will not happen overnight. It continues to be a process, and we cannot be discouraged by setbacks. Let it fuel us to work in partnership, fuel us to use our connections to effect change, while always being mindful of the reason for our advocacy. It's a privilege to partner with the Council for Exceptional Children's Division of Visual Impairments and Deafblindness, the National Family Association for Deafblind, and the National Coalition on Deafblindness to bring you information on teachers of the deafblind, interveners, and an update on Bill 3535, the Cogswell-Macy Act. The CHARGE Syndrome Foundation's vision of a better world for people with CHARGE syndrome and our mission to lead and partner to improve the lives of people with CHARGE syndrome locally, nationally, and internationally through outreach, education, and research fall in alignment with the efforts of all these wonderful groups. As parents, our collective actions can and will make a difference. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today. And now we will hear from our next speakers, Susan and Adam.
This
Okay.
is
Go ahead, Amy.
Camera so that you can have more real estate. And if Adam wants to come on camera, that would be great.
Am I heard? Am I being heard? Adam, tell me if I'm heard. Am I good? Okay, great. Well, phew, that's a relief. But I want to thank the family organizations that have been involved here. I think that it's very important for us to always remember, especially with our state projects and our services in the states, where we begin and where we end, and it's with our families who have the most impact on our students. So I'm Susan Patton, and I'm the Director of Deafblind Services here in the state of Utah, but also the Utah Deafblind Project. And I'm just going to briefly, quite briefly, explain the partnership between our project and our state services, and how our families are not only included in that, but are an essential part and piece to that whole puzzle. It started, if I could get that next slide, thanks. Sometimes I forget to look up at the slide. Our services started in the mid-90s, and it really was an effort with a big parent group, actually. Well, I shouldn't say. Anyway, a parent group interested in education and the advocacy of their students with deafblindness, their children with deafblindness. And they were able to change law and get funding from our state legislative branch to fund our actual services. Then later that became apparent, that joined with our project money. We do have a really nice partnership with our project money to enhance our state money. Our project money goes to training and technical assistance. Let's see. So, and then our state funding provides the salaries for most of our deafblind teacher specialists and all of our interveners. Can I get the next slide? Thank you. Our deafblind teacher specialist, we have a program, 2 programs here in the state of Utah that have a deafblind endorsement that is attached to a special ed license. We're very fortunate here in the state of Utah to have that. Our deafblind and teacher specialists also have a degree in special education, so they are all licensed teachers. We also have the teachers that are going into the home in early intervention who have that early intervention credential also. So they're very well qualified people here in our state. We are able to provide with our project technical assistance and ongoing training for our deafblind teacher specialists. We also have 13 full-time teacher specialists, by the way. Our interveners, right now we have 85 interveners with 69 of those interveners in full-time positions. I know that that's, I say that with almost a cringe because I know that that's not like it is in other states, and again, we feel very fortunate with having that state funding to enable us to do that. Our project supports the intervener training and technical assistance for them on an ongoing basis. A key component for our intervener training and for the ongoing training is our deafblind teacher specialists. Our deafblind teacher specialists communicate with our interveners at least once a month. I say that because it's more like on a weekly basis. Our deafblind teacher specialists are able to hire and supervise the interveners in their regions, which make it is a really a big deal because then we know if they're implementing the strategies that they have been trained on. And again, our project supports the training there. If we could go to the next slide. Every student in the state of Utah identified with deafblindness receives deafblind services and is tracked by our project. So that ranges from, that's on the next bullet down here, but it ranges from an infrequent consultation all the way up to a direct service from the deafblind teacher specialists. Our project supports that with materials that are developed and also ongoing training for the classroom team, the teacher, other related service providers. Down at the very bottom, and I'll just end with this, and our project also supports our family support piece, which is very critical. We have ongoing training opportunities and want to provide ongoing training opportunities for our families on both services and strategies, deafblind strategies in the home and at school. We don't have that consistency. We don't have what we need to take care of our issues. I am going to close with that because I know our time is very short. I would be more than happy to expand on whatever anybody has any questions, and I will talk with Amy after about how to get my information out. I am more than happy to discuss any questions, and again, thank you for the opportunity.
Hi, everybody. This is Adam Graves, and I'm with the Texas Deafblind Project, and I'm here to talk about some of the things that we're doing here in Texas to help prepare districts and schools for personnel, qualified personnel in the school districts. So if we could go to the first slide, and the Texas Project, I just want to give a big howdy to everybody and talk about the ways that we're introducing the intervener and the teacher of students with deafblindness to various districts around the state. And one of the ongoing efforts that we've been doing for several years has been the introduction to the intervener model. And this is training that we provide for educational teams. This isn't for individual interveners. It is designed to help the team learn about the role of an intervener, what the intervener does, and what everybody's place is on that educational team. And as a part of that, we are hoping to build a stronger collaboration between teachers, interveners, and administrators. And we're proud of the fact that we've had people from our intervener training who have become interested in becoming interveners and have gone on to Utah State and taken the coursework through that program and received their credential from Utah State. Unfortunately, there haven't been very many, but we have had some, and that is a good start, I think, for our state. Another thing that we're very proud of is the fact that the Southwest Collegiate Institute for the Deaf has reviewed the OHOA modules. Those are the open hands, open access modules for intervener training, and they are interested in looking at that as a curriculum in order to provide a credential through an accredited organization, and so that the people who go through that training then would receive college credit, which is very exciting. The other thing that is happening in Texas right now is that we have started a Teacher of Students with Deafblindness pilot project. This is the second time that we've run this project, and right now we have three teachers from 2 districts, and one of the districts in Houston actually posted, they've hired a person to serve Houston as a teacher of the students with deafblindness, and that's the first time that anyone from that district has been hired, or any district, I think, in Texas has been hired specifically as a teacher of students with deafblindness. So we're very excited about that, and we're hoping to get the project. There's an article that was written by Chris Montgomery, who is really the lead on this project, and that is in the Division of Visual Impairment and Deafblindness Quarterly, which is the CEC journal, and it describes some of the results that we were able to obtain from the initial pilot, and we're hoping that the results from this pilot show a similar increase in the quality of the educational program for students who are deafblind when there is a teacher of students with deafblindness included on the IEP team. And if we could go to the next slide. This slide is all about partnering up, getting together with the families. We have a very strong relationship with our families here in Texas, between the Texas Deafblind Project and the various family organizations here in the state. And we're very proud of the fact that we've worked together to get legislation passed that recognizes interveners. And that's a very strong partnership, and we hope to continue that in the future. The Deafblind and Multiply Impaired Association of Texas, or DBMAT, has been very actively engaged in raising awareness of the need for interveners, and also teachers of students with deafblindness, and they have been providing scholarships for several years for students who wish to obtain their credential from Utah State, and so that's very, very exciting. There's, in terms of coursework for teachers, right now there's coursework available through Texas Tech, but there's no certification here in Texas. They receive a certificate of completion from Texas Tech, but they're not recognized by the state as certified teachers of students with deafblindness, and that's something that we really want to develop, because we do have people taking those courses. We had $14,000 worth of grant funding from the state, which provided money to cover the costs of the coursework for 6 of the individuals that took that coursework last year, and because of the interest, that money is going to be increased to $25,000 in the coming year. So we're really trying to build the capacity for people who want to be teachers of the deafblind, and we're very interested in making sure that the Alice Cogswell and Sullivan-Macy Act is passed, because we need to make sure that we have those people in place for our students who are deafblind in the state of Texas and in all the states, really. And then if we could go to our last slide. The last slide is about it's y'all come back, because we're having a party here in Texas. We're looking to host the NFADB Family Symposium this July, and that's going to be a great opportunity for family organizations and professional organizations across the country to get together to talk about the national effort to provide qualified personnel out in all of our schools for all of our students who are deafblind and have multiple sensory needs. So we're very excited about that, and that's what's going on in Texas. And we're hoping that some of the things that we're doing here can translate into some programs elsewhere, and we're happy to talk with anybody about some of the efforts that we're doing here, and hopefully help link people up across the country, because it's going to take everybody to do this. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mark Reichert, who is the Director of Public Policy for the American Federation for the Blind, and he is going to talk to you about H.R. 3535, the Cogswell-Macy Act.
This is Mark, but I wanted to make sure Mark is on.
Hi there, Amy. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. We're getting one heck of an echo here. So if folks who are listening, if you all could kindly put yourselves on mute, because you know, at this moment I feel like Lou Gehrig, right? I'm the luckiest man, etc. If you don't know what that is, go Google it after this meeting. You'll enjoy the audio clip. So my name is Mark Reichert. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the American Foundation for the Blind, and I'm really grateful to have been asked to be part of this webinar this evening. The American Foundation for the Blind has been in existence for almost 100 years, and if we have any claims to fame, certainly at the top of that list would be that Ms. Helen Keller worked for us for more than 40 years of her extraordinary life, and you know, so often people have this impression of Helen Keller as being this sweet, maybe not so sweet, but saintly girl at the water pump, and yet we forget that Helen Keller was a fierce, unstoppable force of nature advocate, who many of us might have good political arguments with. She was not a shy person, stood up for things that she believed in, and sometimes those causes, though they were very progressive, weren't always the most popular. I hope that the American Foundation for the Blind nevertheless carries on that tradition of fierce advocacy. We try to build on Helen Keller's legacy by advocating in a whole host of areas. Let me encourage us. I have no idea what slide we're on, but I would look at this as the slide number 2 of my presentation. Hopefully it's a picture of yours truly. I understand that there I am smiling, and I'm smiling by a piano. If that picture isn't up, I hope it will be. I'm proud of this picture, not because I'm in it, but because of where we were when this picture was taken. 5 years ago this week, a lot of us were at the White House for the signing ceremony for a major piece of legislation. We don't have time to talk about what it is today. The title of it is the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. And that's a mouthful of a name, but really what that law does is make sure that all the latest and greatest telecommunications and video programming technologies are much more accessible to all people with disabilities. And I was really honored to be part of a coalition involving blindness and deafness and deafblindness organizations that led to the enactment of that law. It was, as I said, signed into law by President Obama 5 years ago this week, and yet it took about 3 or 4 years of solid work prior to that time to really get that legislation going. I point that out at this beginning sort of stage of my presentation because I think it's important to understand that when we're talking about advocacy and systems change, it does not happen overnight. And it does take I'll just put it out there, a stubborn commitment for the long haul. We'll talk at the conclusion of my remarks about how we can maybe make use of this long-term legislative strategy to make some more immediate change on an individual level. But just know, for purposes of the legislative discussion we're having now, we are all in this for the long haul, and that's an important expectation to manage right up front. So, what are we talking about? Well, the Alice Cogswell and Anne Sullivan-Macy Act is named for the first deaf girl to be formally educated in the U.S., and of course for Helen Keller's teacher, Annie Sullivan. We thought that these two iconic ladies make for great namesakes for our bill because, frankly, this legislation is all about prioritizing the needs of students as well as supporting teachers. And so we thought that the Ms. Cogswell and Ms. Macy, those two folks together, represent very nicely what it is we're trying to achieve, trying to improve services for kids and trying to support and prepare teachers. Before I get into the next slide in better detail, let me just give you some background on sort of the structure here. And if this is old news to you, then nod and smile at me. But I think we all know that in this country, we have a federal government that is, according to our Constitution, supposed to be very, very limited in scope. And there are a lot of people who think that it shouldn't be, and we don't need to get into a political debate on this call about whether you and I believe that our federal government is too big or too small, or how effective or ineffective it is. But one thing we cannot deny is that the federal system, for as big as it might seem to be, and for as powerful as it might seem to be, it is but one piece of the puzzle. We have in this country, 50 states and 6 territories. Each of those jurisdictions has its own rules and regs when it comes to education. And so in a lot of ways, this whole system is fragmented, for better or worse. And so what we're trying to do at the federal level is to push just the right buttons and to put enough pressure on just certain levers so that this sort of fragmented system that we have in this country works better for kiddos with sensory disabilities. So about, I don't know, maybe a year or so after that White House signing ceremony picture was taken, yours truly got to work on the draft legislation for the blindness and vision impairment community. And we at that time just called it the Anne Sullivan-Macy Act. We sort of laid out a number of things that we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that all blind kids are properly counted, in spite of the fact that they may have additional disabilities, because as you may be aware, and it's certainly true in the deafblindness world, if kiddos have additional disabilities in addition to deafblindness. So often they get put in a different category. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. We want to make sure that kids are properly evaluated for all of the unique services that their sensory disability experience means that they need. And we want to make sure that our special education system at all levels is held accountable for providing these services. So we laid out a number of these provisions and also talked about the establishment of something called the Anne Sullivan-Macy Center on Visual Disability and Education Excellence, which is really a comparable kind of structure in a lot of ways to what the deafness community has in place and has had in place for a while at the so-called Clare Center at Gallaudet University, and what the deafblindness community has in place in terms of both the national entities that serve the deafblindness population as well as the state deafblind project. So that's really what we tried to do. And then we said, you know what, let's reach out to those communities that we worked with on that 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, because that was a really good model, that model of collaboration and coalition building. We had a great deal of success with that, and there's strength in numbers, and let's make sure we do that. And that's exactly what happened. And so first the deafness and hard of hearing community came on board, and then most recently the deafblindness community came on board. If you were to follow the links that are in these various slides to the full text of the legislation, which you can basically find if you go to www.afb.org/Cogswell-Macy Act, all one word. If you go there, you'd find an exceedingly long piece of legislation. If you suffer from insomnia, I encourage you to print it out, have perhaps your spouse read it to you as a bedtime story. You will be out like a light because there's an awful lot of legalese in there. But what we're going to focus on tonight, and I'll sort of summarize this, and I know we've got colleagues on the phone who will also help to elucidate this more particularly for this community. We're going to focus on the third piece of that legislation, which is specific to deafblindness. As I said, blindness was the first groups to put the language together. That's the Title II of the bill. Deafness is the groups the coalition that came on next. That's Title I of the bill. And Title III of the bill is all about deafblindness. So there's an awful lot of provisions that are very similar. If you were to read this bill cover to cover, as I said, not only would you cure your insomnia, but you'd also see a lot of redundant language all throughout the bill, the same kinds of policy objectives that we're trying to achieve for blind kiddos, deafblind kids. There's really an awful lot that are parallel. There are some, however, unique provisions in Title III that really need to be pulled out. So one of the things that we're wanting to make sure that we do in Title III of the Cogswell-Macy bill, the title that is specific to deafblindness, is we want to make sure that the U.S. Department of Education makes a much more substantial investment in the preparation of teachers of students with deafblindness. Is the department doing that now? They are certainly doing it to a certain extent. What we need to be able to do is make sure that the investment of dollars at the federal level is consonant with a clear national need, and we clearly are not seeing that investment now. So what the Cogswell-Macy bill and Title III specifically does is really describe exactly who these folks are and names in a much more sort of aggressive, affirmative way the fact that we need to make a better federal investment in these personnel. The second major thing that Title III of the Cogswell-Macy bill does in the deafblindness world is to raise the profile of interveners. I continue to be so impressed at the level of passion and advocacy and frankly substantive argument that this community, the deafblindness community, is articulating for the need for interveners. You all rock. That's the technical legal term for that. You all rock. You guys are organized. You're passionate, and you make a great case. Quite frankly, not enough people in this country have a clue who and what interveners are, and it's frankly very, very tough at the federal level because of that fragmented system that I was describing at the beginning to really get into a lot of detail about who and what interveners are. The best thing that we can do for the cause of promoting intervener services is to make sure that intervener services have the best status that they can have, that profession and that set of skill delivery can get at the federal level. How do we do that? Well, there's a section of federal law that lays out in some detail a rather exhaustive list of so-called examples of related services that kids with disabilities must be provided if they are, in fact, to receive a free and appropriate public education. And if we brought up the text of that section of the law, you'd see that it would rattle on for an extended period of time, listing a number of professional groups, certainly occupational therapy, physical therapy, and on and on. Interpreter services for students who are deaf are listed there. In fact, interpreter services were added in 2004, the last time that the special education law was up for review. In 1997, the blindness community got orientation and mobility services added as a related service. And both in the case of orientation and mobility in 1997 and interpreter services in 2004, I think the blindness and deafness communities can say with great confidence that the addition of those two professions named there among the list of formally recognized related services has been a significant benefit to promoting the need for these services to be provided to kids. Does the inclusion of orientation and mobility services, interpreter services, and if our bill goes through, intervener services in this section mean that every child who happens to be deafblind gets intervener services automatically? No, because like everything else in IDEA, our special education law, it is the IEP team that makes determinations about what services a kiddo needs. And really what we're trying to do here at the federal level is to say to states, look, you can no longer ignore the fact that this profession of intervener exists. You need to be aware that IEP teams will be much more aggressively aware that this profession and these services are available, and you must be prepared to provide them. So that's really the value of doing what we're trying to do in Title III. It's a little frustrating, I know, because sometimes people will say, well, why can't you just write into the federal law that if my kiddo happens to have this label or that label, that certain services will automatically be provided? There's nothing in IDEA that really does that, because ultimately the IEP team needs to be in charge. That's where the action's at, and parents at that level are always going to be the kiddo's best advocate, along with our very committed teachers of students with deafblindness and other professionals who are looking out for the kiddo's best interests. So that's where the action needs to be. But what we're trying to do here in Title III is to lift up the value of intervener services. And I think if history is our guide, including interveners as a related service will be key. Two other final points. The Title III of the Cogswell-Macy bill, as I said, very much parallels the language that we've got included in the deafness and blindness titles of the bill, Titles 1 and 2. And one of the ways in which Title III parallels those other two provisions is that for all three titles, we are calling on states to engage in some very significant strategic planning. Some of you might say, particularly those of you who do strategic planning for work, oy vey, strategic planning, that's a lot of people sitting around talking, writing documents that nobody pays much attention to. They have a lot of verbiage in them, and they often don't amount to much. Well, in this particular case, what our Cogswell-Macy bill does is very specifically call on states to amend the state plans that they are required to submit to the U.S. Department of Education. These are the formal structures that they must submit to the Department of Education if states are to get a share of the 11.x billion, billion with a B, billion dollars that we make available every year in this country to states. $11 billion sounds like a heck of a lot of money, doesn't it? But that's really only about 16% of the total dollars that are made available across the country by states and the federal government to support special education. It's a woefully underfunded program, and a lot of us have been trying to work on trying to beef up federal spending for special education. But be that as it may, what we're trying to say in this bill is that states are going to amend those plans to specifically address a number of things for each of our populations. In the case of students who are deafblind, the state plan will need to be amended such that the state will ensure that all students who are deafblind in the state requiring specialized services meeting their unique needs, and our bill spells out what those needs are, will be made available. We've set the bill up this way to call on states to develop these state plans because, as you've already heard tonight, there are a lot of states who are doing some amazing things. Utah for sure, Texas. Oh gosh, I'm no expert in deafblindness as some of my other colleagues are. There's probably a number of states we could call out. There's also a lot of states that are really kind of fallen behind. And there's a lot of parts in this country where services are virtually non-existent. We can't possibly, at the federal level, write this thing to meet every individual state's needs because every state's a little different. And so what we're trying to do here is to say, states, you need to amend your state plans to address certain things, among them making sure you have an adequate number of teachers. How you exactly go about doing that is your business, states, but we're going to make sure that you do it. And then finally, and this again is a parallel issue to deafness and blindness, the issue that I started off with tonight, how we identify our students. It's absolutely the case that a child who has blindness, deafness, or deafblindness, and who has other disabilities in addition to that sensory disability is more often than not categorized formally in the category under federal law of multiple disabilities. That may be entirely appropriate when you look at a particular child's needs. I remember a set of parents saying to me, well, you know, my kid's blind and has intellectual disabilities, but, you know, honestly, my kid's blindness is the least of my kiddo's problems. I kind of wrinkled my little nose at that when I heard parents put it that way, but I think we can understand the sentiment. It may very well be the case that with a child with a lot of complex needs, that using the multiple disabilities category is the appropriate category. Nevertheless, it is critical that if blindness, deafness, or deafblindness is part of the mix, that sensory disability is documented by the IEP team, that appropriate evaluations are made available by the school and the state for that kiddo to receive to make sure that those blindness, deafness, or deafblindness specific services that should be available to them are assessed in terms of what this kid might need, and that the child gets them. Right now, what's happening is that the label is driving service, and that can no longer be tolerated. We cannot have a situation where simply because states have to label a child with their so-called primary disability does not mean that services that meet their unique sensory disability needs can go by the wayside. That's exactly what's happening now. It's certainly happening in the blindness world for sure, all over the place, where some 50 or 60% of our students have other disabilities and frankly are not receiving the services that they need. So what does our bill do? Our bill basically says, you're not doing that anymore, states. We aren't going to micromanage you and tell you that you need to completely uproot all of the ways in which you categorize students. We're simply saying that whatever system, whatever approach you use, if blindness, deafness, or deafblindness is part of the mix, that sensory disability needs to be documented, and that means that parents will know that their child is entitled to be evaluated for all of those sensory disability-specific services that go with such disability. And if, upon appropriate evaluation, it's found that the child could benefit from those services, that's what should be provided. We think that this will be a tremendous benefit in making sure that states are held much more accountable for providing appropriate services to our kids. Finally, to wrap up, what can you do? Certainly, the short answer for me is vote early, vote often. Contact your member of the United States House of Representatives. Everybody's got at least one of those characters, and there are 2 U.S. senators that you got. And whether you like them, agree with them, have any regard for them, ultimately they do work for you, even though sometimes some of those people up there don't seem to act like it. And it's important for you to reach out, particularly to your House of Representatives member, and tell them to co-sponsor H.R. 3535. What we're trying to do is to get a comparable bill introduced in the United States Senate. I would dearly have loved to have come on this call and made a big announcement that we had a bill introduced in the Senate. Can't do that. Not all dreams come true. But for now, our focus is in the United States House of Representatives, and so please, through calls or emails, written paper letters, not so much. If you send a paper letter to Capitol Hill, it'll get sent to a glorified microwave and get burnt for a while, and ultimately your letter will probably be delivered 18 months from now. Your best bet is to call your member of Congress, and I believe we've provided a phone number for you in the slides. For that. What I will say is, and I started with this, this is going to be a long effort. I told you that that bill that we got passed, that we got signed in 2010, took some years to get done. I'll be honest with you. The real strategy here is to get the Cogswell-Macy bill as far through the legislative process as we can. I think there's a possibility that we can really make some hay with this bill. It may very well be, as we all know, we're in at the beginning stages of a presidential election season. It may very well be that we're talking about 2017, the spring of 2017, before the wheels really get rolling because of just the way that politics works in this country. But the truth is that this legislation is in place so that when the Congress takes up the National Special Education Law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, when it takes up that bill, and as it is supposed to do every 3, 4, 5 years or so, it's been a while since the Congress has looked at that larger law, that when the Congress takes up that larger special ed law, that we will be ready with our legislation to say, you know what, the Cogswell-Macy bill hasn't gone to any president's desk for signature, but we've got X number of co-sponsors in the House. We've got X number of co-sponsors for the bill that we've introduced in the Senate. We've got a group of tigers known as parents of deafblind kiddos who aren't going to take it anymore, who have absolutely committed to wanting to do something, and they're totally behind this legislation. So Congress, as you're looking at this larger special education law, take a look at the Cogswell-Macy bill and pull provisions out of it to include in the national special education law as it gets revised. And finally, I will say to those parents, I've been blind all my life, in case it's not painfully obvious from slides or anything else I've said here. I do not have children, but I am the proud only child of parents who I think worked their tails off through the IEP process, and frankly, the proud son of a mom who I saw break down quite a bit at IEP meetings over the course of time. So I know from personal experience how frustrating it can be, and how frustrating it can be to wait for change. You don't have to wait for change with respect to what you can do today with this legislation. If you're struggling with your child's needs, you can address both the need for advocacy for the Cogswell-Macy bill and get attention for your child's needs right now. There's a lot of ways you can do that. One way that I loved, and I saw a set of parents do this a while ago, and frankly, it was incredible. You can write to your member of Congress, send them an email, and then say to them, you know, Mr., Madam, I need you to co-sponsor H.R. 3535 because absolutely we need to change deafblind education in this country, and some of the things that we've got in the Cogswell-Macy bill will do that. But let me tell you my story. Let me tell you the story about my child and what's not happening for my child right now. Not only is your story a compelling story, but when you're done writing that letter, CC that sucker to everyone and anyone in your orbit that has any potential impact on the education of your child, to administrators, to folks you've been working with who maybe haven't been as responsive to you as you want them to be. Depending on your story and what it is you're trying to achieve, it may be appropriate to forward copies of your letter, perhaps to local press. And frankly, those parents that really stand up and make some noise are the ones that get some services for their kiddos now. So I would strongly encourage you to stick with us for the long haul for sure on promoting the Cogswell-Macy bill, but also know that as you're advocating for that larger national effort, that you can also sort of use that as a springboard in creative ways to advocate for your child. With that, Amy, I think I am turning it over to Linda Alsop and company. But if I'm wrong about that, I'm sure someone will jump in. But thank you all very, very much for listening.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Mark. And I do want to make sure that both Linda and Tracy, who are next on the agenda representing the Deafblind Coalition, one of our gracious sponsors, do you have access to audio or visual? I did see that Linda was in the room, and hopefully if you can unmute your line, Linda, and Tracy. I think Tracy is on the phone.
I'm here, Amy. It's Tracy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Tracy. Great.
Okay, great.
I don't know if we have Linda. Linda Alsop, are you able to access audio at this time? I cannot. Linda's in the chat pod. We are not able to hear you, Linda. I don't know if you can activate your microphone icon. I don't know if you can find that on your screen. We'll give Linda a minute, and hopefully she'll be able to activate her microphone. Tracy, since we have you on the line, please tell us a little bit about the coalition and your involvement in this important legislation.
Sure, thank you. Well, hi, everyone. On behalf of the National Deafblind Coalition, I'd like to say thanks to CEC for bringing us all together tonight, and I'd like to express the coalition's strong support of H.R. Bill 3535. We're excited to partner with all the entities mentioned this evening, and we all know that we have much to do, but certainly we are stronger working together, sharing our energy on behalf of children and families. So the National Coalition on Deafblindness is we are in our infancy. We are looking at different ways of connecting and collaborating with various national, state, and local agencies. But again, we're moving forward, and we have spent quite a bit of work and focus on the whole section on Title III of H.R. 3535, and certainly are very grateful for all the work that Mark and Barbara have also done on this project. So I just want to check in. Linda, can you hear, or do you have audio?
Linda is typing in the chat pod in case you can't see. She says she's unmuted her microphone but can't seem to be heard. This same thing happened to Clara, so we apologize. Tracy, is there anything else that you'd like to share? We are going to have an open question and answer session, so Sherry is suggesting in the chat pod that Linda call back in and perhaps could add anything at that time. We wanted to give everyone...
I would just...
Go ahead.
Sorry, I would just like to, again, describe for folks the National Coalition and our focus on providing information advocacy in a collaborative way to policymakers, fiscal agents, educational professionals, and community leaders on behalf of children and youth who are deafblind, and in conjunction and partnership with adults who are deafblind. So again, thank you so much for connecting and allowing us to join in this great endeavor tonight. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome, and some friends are trying to help Linda get the call-in number. The call-in number is usually affiliated with your sign-in. This is Amy speaking. I just want to thank everybody for their sense of adventure and their patience with technology. Part of the reason we hosted this in an unfamiliar technology is because we didn't want it to be affiliated with any of our agency's funding. This is obviously a call late in the evening, and this is obviously a call where we're trying to just have some special time with you. So we applaud everybody's sense of adventure, and I see that Sherry is helping helping Linda to get connected. So again, let me just personally thank the National Coalition on Deafblindness, NFADB, and the Charge Syndrome Foundation for their generous sponsorship of this call, which made this possible. Obviously, you heard from Adam Graves from Texas and Susan Patton from Utah, and the illustrious Mark Reichert from American Foundation for the Blind. Actually, a lot of effort has gone into this call. A lot of effort has this call. I know it seems kind of silly to put together, this much effort going into one call, but it really is the culmination of so much hard work. So maybe I'm hearing a voice. Maybe it is Linda.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Linda.
Thank you. I tried the old-fashioned way of dialing in. So, all technology levels work. Anyway, I'll be brief. Basically, Tracy represented our thoughts. The coalition is intended to specifically help with advocacy. We do have a website, and I think that's on the next slide. If we can get the slide number 2. We want people to know that there is a website where information will be available. I guess, did we not get the slide?
It's on the previous slide. Here it is.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So that's the website address, and be sure not to Google it at this point. You'll have to put the address in, and there will be information from the homepage on what's happening. So there are other locations, as Mark mentioned, where you can get information, but here's another piece that you can go on and get updates. You can read the bill. It's in its entirety there. Title 3, specific to deafblindness, begins on page 40, and it's 10 pages from 40 to 50, so that might be a little bit easier reading if you start there. And you'll find those 4 main areas included. Right at the very beginning, you'll see the definition is inserted, and Barbara and Mark were very helpful to us as we were putting together the language to show us how to include the definition as related to identifying the children. So you'll see that there, plus the other 3 things. So anyway, just to encourage you to know that that's another site that we are working as a community to advocate and to be involved, and that we're all supportive of this effort, and we're in it for the long haul. So if you have any questions, you contact us. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And wasn't it just a show of how supportive our community is to see how many people were trying to help Linda get online and get audio access? So we have a sense of a strong spirit in our community, and you can see it when you attend the NFADB conferences. You can see it when you attend the Charge conference that I recently attended in Chicago. Our kids make us strong, and they help us persevere. Mark spoke to our advocacy and our passion, and how much passion he has seen around both interveners and teachers of the deafblind. We're going to go to our last slide there, Diane. And if anyone has questions, if you are unmuted, you can just please say your name, say you have a question. You can direct it to any one of our panelists tonight, or if you feel more comfortable, you can just use the chat pod, and I'll try to watch and direct the questions to some of our speakers who are taking the time to be with us. And let me just take this moment. Josh, how are you doing? Do you need an interpreter switch? We've just been so pleased to have Josh.
The interpreter came to switch, and I just told him that I was fine. I'll just finish it up, so I'm good.
I mean, an amazing interpreter, Josh, through an agency that happens to be in Texas, by the way, guys, just as an FYI, and our wonderful captionist. Thank you. So we have a question from Trish Meek in the chat pod to the entire audience. She's asking, how can DHH teachers get deafblind certification in North Carolina? And I could sort of work on that question, but I don't know if one of our panelists would like to address that. Trish, this is Amy speaking. At East Carolina University, I know that there is a program, and has been for many years, for teachers. What Adam and Susan were addressing, Susan from Utah, there is a couple of programs that train teachers in Utah, but the state in Utah recognizes deafblind teacher specialists. And as Adam was mentioning, although Texas is really working hard on a teacher of deafblind pilot, there isn't an official state-recognized certificate. So various universities do offer certificates, graduate certificates. Texas Tech is one of them. You heard Adam mention that. But I would explore with East Carolina University in your home state and see if there is a series of coursework that you can take. And Texas Tech, there's a comment from Jackie, does Texas Tech offer a deafblind certificate online? There are courses online through Texas Tech where people can take a series of courses, and what they get is a graduate certificate. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the state recognizes a teacher of the deafblind, but there are wonderful programs. There's one at the University of Utah, at Utah State University, that has a series of coursework for teachers. Is there anyone else that would like to address that? Perhaps Linda, if you still have audio access.
I have audio access, and I think, Amy, that you've covered it pretty completely. Here in Utah, the University of Utah program is an on-campus program. If you're interested in that, and I believe they have some scholarship money, if you're interested, and Kathy Nelson is the contact person there. At Utah State University, our program is all online, so it's intended to be able to be accessed by people outside of the state. So that's just one of the distinctions here. We certainly recognize the need for more access to a teacher of the deafblind or specialist of the deafblind, and there is a group of us that are working on that from the higher ed programs as supported by NCDB. So you'll probably hear more about that in the near future.
Thank you so much, Linda. And I'm going back to our chat pod, and thanks for everyone that's talking there. Susan from Utah is also mentioning the new scholarships that are available, as Linda also just mentioned. Go ahead, someone. Okay, this is Amy. I wanted to just recognize Barbara in the chat pod. She's asking, how can a state parent organization best support HR 3535? Call and or email Congressman. Mark, I don't know if you'd like to address that. And Barbara's got a follow-up question here. Should we ask senators to sponsor similar bills in the U.S. Senate? I'm just checking to see if Mark's on the line. I think it would be a resounding yes from Mark or from a representative of the coalition. Oh, Diane is saying that Mark is now muted. So I don't know, Mark, if you can unmute yourself. But if not, I will turn this over to perhaps Tracy Luiselli from the coalition can talk about ways to get Senate sponsorship.
Hi, Amy. I think those personal connections to your senators, I mean, it really comes down to that. And I know that it takes time and legwork, but we found that certainly even on the state level, it's really making that connection with your senator. And if you call or connect or even send an email and you have, say, someone from their office answer, don't be discouraged, because many of those folks really are actively working the phones and working emails and getting back to people. You may not get that direct link to your senator, but you will be put on the list, and your comments and your issues will be directed. Sometimes they're funneled, but again, I think it's the perseverance and the drive to keep at it that's really going to make a difference.
Amy, this is Mark. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
I really appreciate those sage words of wisdom. Everyone do exactly what my colleague just said. One of the things that people that I'm constantly surprised by, people sort of assume that calling a member of Congress, or they're kind of intimidated by it because they don't know what's going to happen. Let me just outline for you exactly what will happen. You pick up that phone, you call the switchboard. We gave you the switchboard number. You ask for your member of Congress. If you don't know who it is, we've given you some resources for tracking that down as well. But you call, get connected. You're going to get a very friendly, very young receptionist, male or female, who's going to ask, to whom you might want your call directed. You can simply ask for the staffer who handles special education, or you could ask to speak to the member of Congress directly if you're feeling particularly bold that day. And who knows? You never know. Sometimes that works. More often than not, though, you do want to talk to a staff member. If you don't know their name, you don't have to, do anything more than simply say, "Look, I'm calling to talk to the staff person who's handling special ed." If they don't know, or won't tell you, or they say, yes, it's Jane Doe, but she's not in the office right now, all you need to do is simply say to them that you're calling your constituent, identify yourself. You may want to identify where you live so that they are clear that you're not just some miscellaneous voice, but that you are, in fact, a legitimate constituent. And simply say, I'm calling to urge the member to co-sponsor HR 3535. If you give them the bill number, then you don't necessarily have to worry about the name of the bill, but it's always good to have both. So tell them you want to co-sponsor HR 3535, the Cogswell-Macy Act. If you are talking to a staff person, let's say you call that office, you get to the receptionist, you say, I want to talk to the staff person who handles special education or education issues generally, and you get connected with this incredibly talented and incredibly young staff member. They may ask you specific questions about the bill that you can't answer. And you know what? When you can't answer those questions, you don't look dumb, you look authentic. Because these people get all kinds of slick presentations done to them 20, 30 times a day. And so when you contact that office and you say, and they ask you specific questions, well, gee, what does this bill have to do with maintenance of effort under IDEA? And you say, maintenance of effort? I don't even know what that is. I can, I'm trying to make ends meet for my family. Is that the maintenance of effort you're talking about? No, you don't have to know all the details. And what you can simply say is, I am part of a larger effort. I'm part of the National Coalition on Deafblindness. Here's their website. And you know what? I know some colleagues who can get back in touch with you. And you know what they've done by asking a question that you can't answer? You now have an excuse to talk to them again. So don't ever feel like there's anything about this process that's intimidating, well over your head. There's nobody who knows anything more than you do about your kid and about deafblindness. And you know that we need this legislation, so call them. Tell them that we need to co-sponsor HR 3535. And again, if they ask you questions, you've got some resources thanks to calls and webinars like this to turn folks over to, or to use yourself to do some homework and then get back to them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is Amy. We have about 4 minutes left on this call for the evening, and Trish Meek in the chat pod had an important question that I didn't want to overlook. She says, will the 3535 bill help interveners get more money by being paid as specialists instead of just paraprofessionals? And Mark, since you have the floor, what is your thinking on the recognition that the national law will provide?
So the national, believe it or not, we do not have a federal law that requires that kids who are blind be educated by a blind specialist. We don't have a federal law that requires that a deaf child be educated by a deaf specialist. What we have is a federal law that says states will make the determination about what the qualifications are for the professionals that they will allow, that they will let loose on their kids in their given state. In this country, we take a great deal of pride the fact that education is a local state issue, and for as much as it might seem like the federal government is pushing top-down, frankly, there are an awful lot of areas where there's an awful lot of hands-off, and the states want it that way. The business about credentials, what the credentials are for professionals, and therefore what they are paid, how they're valued, tangibly valued in a given state, that is most assuredly a state-by-state issue. That having been said, you better believe that at the federal level, if interveners are getting more attention, if they are named explicitly in the law, since Lord knows they aren't right now, if they're named explicitly in the law, just like we've seen with orientation and mobility, and just like we've seen with interpreter services, but especially in the case of orientation and mobility, if we add intervener service as a related service, this puts much more pressure on states to hire interveners, to make sure that they are available so that at the IEP team level, as parents and others are advocating for such services to be provided, that they are in fact available to be provided. People are going to have to recruit interveners. I mean, wouldn't it be a wonderful problem to have that there were multiple states fighting over a limited pool of interveners? My favorite story about this in the blindness world is that some years ago, in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is one of the more wealthy counties in the country, they were trying to lure teachers of students with vision impairments to the county, and so they actually were offering $10,000 signing bonuses to teachers of students with vision impairments. Now, of course, in Montgomery County, they could afford it. But the funny part about that story was that when the Washington Post reported on this, they said Montgomery County is offering $10,000 singing bonuses. They misspelled signing and put it as singing. I expected if I got a $10,000 bonus to take a new job, I'd probably be singing too. Is there a guarantee that interveners will get paid more as a result of this? No guarantees. It's very much a state law kind of thing, state level kind of thing. But you better believe that by including interveners as a related service at the federal level, it puts exactly the kind of pressure, and frankly the only way that we can put the kind of pressure on states to do the right thing.
So, Mark, this is Amy. Thank you so much for that very thorough and teaching by example, with the example of interpreters and orientation and mobility specialists becoming more recognized. We are really out of time at this time, but what I hope that this webinar has provided for you, we are going to be posting a link to this recording. We are also going to be sharing a link to this recording with the sponsors of this webinar so that you are able to disseminate that to your networks, NFADB, Charge Syndrome Foundation, and of course the Deafblind Coalition. So we're hoping that we can post the link to this webinar in many places and share it widely. Jackie Brown had a great comment on, well, how can we get more information? She works at the Overbrook School for the Blind. How can we get more information out to parents? I think it is through this network. It is through the CEC. It is through the Charge Syndrome Foundation, NFADB, the Deafblind Coalition, and as Mark mentioned, the American Foundation for the Blind, that we work together. This webinar was a product of collaboration, and it would not have happened without collaboration. So we will pledge to work together after this call. You will have access to more information, and through our websites have access to information that you can share with parents. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Thanks to Diane Pevsner, our division president, for hosting the meeting in her go-to-meeting room and for dealing with all the technology. Thanks to CAG Interpreting Services and Josh specifically, who interpreted the meeting. Thanks so much to our CART captioning provider and to all of our presenters tonight. Thanks to you, parents. It really is through you that laws get formed and changed. So we applaud you, and we thank you for taking time to be here. So with that, we're going to sign off and pledge to be in touch. Please check our websites for updates, and thanks everybody for attending.